Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Arun Shourie's latest book has just been published and here it is. It's called The Commissioner for Lost Causes. It's a fascinating story of his years as editor of the Indian Express. And remember, it was as editor of the Indian Express that Arun Shourie first became famous. Joining me now to talk about the fund of stories and anecdotes that are in this book is Arun Shourie himself. Arun Shourie, your book, as I said in that introduction, is a fascinating and delightful collection of stories and anecdotes when you were editor of the Indian Express. But what I had completely forgotten is that you were twice sacked as editor of the paper. That's quite a rare accolade. You must be pretty proud of it.
Yes, I am very proud of it. You know, because at that time there were three persons who had been removed, dismissed from their jobs. One was Mr. Pran Chopra, you remember, from Statesman. The other was George Verghese during the emergency from Hindustan Times. And the third was me. But there's only one person who was dismissed not once but twice. That was me. And but that's not my only distinction. I also have, I'm one person dismissed twice, and I also have 4 certificates of honesty from the CBI.
So 4 times they investigated you,
Yes.
failed to find anything and gave you a certificate instead.
Yes, and they reported to the court, the closure.
But you know, the interesting thing is, the first time Ramnath Goenka tried to get you sacked, he asked George Verghese to do it,
Yes.
but you were saved by the fact that you won the Magsaysay Award. So instead of sacking you, the paper had to turn around and pretend to be proud of you.
Well, actually, you know, what happened was that Ramnathji seems to have written a letter of dismissal and told Verghese that don't give it till my flight has taken off. So we had come back from a sort of peace negotiation, and when I came, there was this teleprinter message. In those days, teleprinters used to come that I've been awarded this thing. So Verghese must have rung him up and said कि भाई अब इस बार चलो आज नहीं कर सकते फिर बाद में करेंगे. But about being proud, I don't think that was the case. You see, because I forget now, but the fact that I had got the Magsaysay Award must have got a single column somewhere inside the page.
You mean they didn't make it front news
I
page?
don't now remember, but I don't think so. Maybe it was front page with a small notice. But there's another point to it. You see, Ramnathji was very possessive about his paper. I don't think he was possessive about any other person in his family also, but about the paper he was. So if you got the award while working for his paper, it was, why did Karan get it?
Why didn't I get it?
I narrated an incident there about my going with Guru Murthy and my great friend Cho Ramaswamy to the Paramacharya. And Ramnathji said, जाओ से वरदान लेकर आओ, because we were under tremendous pressure by the government. And in the sequence that I have described, in the end, the Paramacharya, who was quite blind and quite hard of hearing at that time, and in his 90s probably, in a hall, he was sitting with his board back to the wall. We were sitting at the end of this crowd. And at one stage, he had worn a thing had been wrapped around his head. And he took it off and he told somebody. So that fellow carried this thing and everybody was looking at what's happening. And that fellow brought it. That was a scarf that had been tied on him to honor his visit to this temple where he was inaugurating an idol. And that person put it on me. So I was astonished, everybody was, and so on in the south. So when I came, I told Ramnathji that this is what happened. He said, तुम्हारे पर डाला? आज देखिए तो उन्होंने नहीं डाला, उन्होंने किसी को कहा कि एक्सप्रेस वालों पर डालो तो.
But you know, the second time you were sacked, he didn't do it in person. He sent the dismissal letter on the teleprompter, and you revealed in your book that you very quickly discovered the letter couldn't have been written by Ramnath Goenka. Tell us that story.
Well, you see, actually what had happened was that this Mandal agitation was going on. And I was certainly writing against reservations. I remained against them, and I found that the Mandal report was really very bad. It was full of holes. And the only scheduled caste member, one member was from the scheduled caste, and he had put in a note of dissent. So we were doing all this, and the students were up in a rage in the university and everywhere. One person had tried to immolate himself. We were reporting all this. And there was not a murmur from Ramnaji of protest that this is wrong and so on. And suddenly one night, I've just come back from the office and the phone rings and the news editor says, "Sir, आप वापस आइए." वापस आइए? क्या हो गया? कहते सर एक मैसेज है RNG के नाम पर. सरप्राइज. मैंने क्या पढ़कर सुना दो. इसे नहीं, ये पढ़ने वाली बात नहीं, आप आकर पढ़िए. I went there. I called Jagannathan, Prabhash Joshi, 3-4 of us, we met. It was a long message and completely coherent. Ramnaji could not have written it. We knew he was very ill, that it was obviously written by somebody else. So Jagannathan suggested that no, the only way is you go and find out. Go to Bombay just now and find out from him what's in his mind. And I went there and Ramnaji was completely, I mean, I'm very sorry, he was very, very unwell and not lucid.
So someone had written the letter on his behalf and in a sense forged his signature and sent it by teleprompter.
No. In the teleprinter messages, there was no signature.
So the letter was written by someone else, but they claimed it was from Ramnath Goenka.
So I'm sure that the persons who were trying to take over the paper at that time and use his grandsons on either side to take over the paper, they are the ones who must have thought that a person like me or Gurumurthy, we would be the obstacles, and then they first had me removed and then Gurumurthy removed.
Now over the years, and this becomes very apparent in your book, you got to know Ramnath Goenka very well. And the impression that you paint of him is that he was tough and calculating, but also a lovable rogue. Would I be wrong in saying that despite the fact he sacked you twice, and did it in a fairly dishonorable sort of way, nonetheless, you grew to like him, and at times you even admired him?
Yes, of course. Actually, the second time he did not dismiss me, it was somebody else. But yes, the first time he did dismiss me under great pressure from the government. He was a great fighter. And if I had any resentment at that time, it must have been very small, because maybe it was time to move over. I always found that in my life, if there is a big crash on the road, then it's time to get off that road. But the fact is that he is the only one who let us do things which nobody else would let us do. And so, and being with him was an adventure, every day a new adventure. And he was a great fighter, a very resourceful fighter. You say he was lovable, a rogue, not a rogue. He was a very crafty man. It's very necessary to be crafty to outwit governments and to fight them. And he was that. But he would also use it for man management and so on, for other purposes.
He seemed to have a wonderful way with words. Right at the start of your book, you say, he gave you a guru mantra, yes. And I'm going to read it out. पहले हमेशा 10 कदम आगे का सोचें. दूसरा, अगर दूसरा समझता है कि तुम उसे बहन की गाली दोगे तो उसे माँ की गाली निकालो, तभी तुम्हारी बात अच्छी तरह सुनी जाएगी.
That is an incident that happened about, the government had taken over the paper and reconstituted the board. There was a whole story about behind that as to how he found that 2 of the members. Actually, what happened was, he sent a message to Mrs. Gandhi that your Devi अखबार आपका है, मगर मैं बूढ़ा हूँ, मैं मर रहा हूँ. आपके पिता के लिए मैंने काम किए हैं, ऐसे काम किए हैं जो कि जिसका वर्णन नहीं किया जा सकता. तो आप मेरी सेल्फ रिस्पेक्ट के लिए you send me the names, I will appoint them to the board. So when the list of names came, he found that there were 2 of them who he knew. To one of them he had done a favor. So he had he had a foot in his own board appointed by the government. But they met. So on his telling, he pretended he had fallen very ill. So he pretended to be very ill. And he asked, on his telling, he asked Kamal Nath, कैसी भिजवा रहे हो आजकल? सुना है मुसल्टी भिजवा रहे हो? कि पहाड़न भी भिजवा रहे हो? एवरीबडी, क्या हो गया? किसके बारे में? क्या भिजवा रहे हैं? अरे लॉन्डी, किसके लिए? संजय गांधी के लिए. अरे in the emergency to take Sanjay Gandhi's name in this context? Everybody, कि आपका दिमाग पागल हो गया ये वो. He said no, now I have your attention. तुम सब मिले हो मेरे एडिटर को निकालने के लिए. मुलगांवकर को मैंने वैसे ही साइड पर कर दिया है. अब तुम नरसिम्हन को निकाल कर टाइम्स ऑफ इंडिया के मूवी क्रिटिक को मेरा एडिटर बना रहे हो. वो मुसलमान मोहम्मद शमीम को तुम बनाओ, मैं कल तुम्हें डिसमिस कर दूंगा. तो के बिरला, who was then the, I'm telling only what Ramnaji told me. के बिरला, who was the chairman of the board appointed by the government, he said, बाबू आप समझ नहीं रहे, पेपर आपका नहीं है, हम बोर्ड हैं. इसे तुम्हें कुछ नहीं पता, अपने पिता से जाकर पूछो, मैं कल डिसमिस कर दूंगा. तो कैसे हुआ? On his telling, you see, he had thought 10 steps ahead. That you send me the names, I will appoint them.
If I appoint, I can dismiss.
Yes, the appointing authority has the part of dismissal. Of course, in the story, it is more colourful, but the fact may have been something slightly
He
different.
was a very clever, crafty, far-sighted, thinking man.
And that was the point about कि 10 कदम आगे सोचो. And the point there was that he kept that secret with himself even through a nearly fatal illness. And of the Ma and Behan Galis, it was, you see, that they may not have expected, but the preface with which he began.
In fact, he also had a very crafty but clever and sensible attitude to the relationship that should exist between the proprietor of a paper and the editor. And once again, he told it to you as yet another guru mantra. He said, and this is very important, जब मुझे मुश्किल पड़ेगी तो मैं तुम्हारी कमीज पर हाथ पहुंचूंगा कि अरुण मेरा कहना नहीं मान रहा. जब तुम्हें कुछ ना करना हो तो मेरे कुर्ते पे हाथ पहुंच लेना कि रामनाथ मुझे करने नहीं दे रहा.
Yes.
Blame each other and get away with it yourself.
Yes, of course. You see, of course, you can't use these devices for long because then people will discover कि ये दोनों, they are doing this pantomime. But the incident was very interesting. He called me. इधर आओ, जल्दी आओ, एकदम फौरन आओ. So I went.
And that's exactly how he spoke.
Yes.
Abrupt and
yes.
officious.
Not officious, familiar. So I went and I opened the door. And Chandrasekhar ji was sitting there, who later became the Prime Minister. So I had barely entered. Ramnath ji said, पेपर तुम्हारा है, तुम्हारे बाप का है. मैंने कहा था कि भाई इसके चंद्रशेखर के आदमी को तुम नहीं, नेताजी के आदमी को तुम स्ट्रिंगर बनाओ बलिया में, तुम्हारा पैसा जाता है, तुम्हारे बाप का पैसा जाता है. मैंने कहा था कि स्ट्रिंगर बनाओ, क्यों नहीं बनाया अभी तक? He had not told me anything.
So you were absolutely flummoxed.
No, not flummoxed. I knew his ways. So I went. He said, Chandrasekhar, अरुण तो मेरा मित्र है, वैसे भी मित्र, छोटी बात है, कोई रामनाथ इतना गुस्से होने की जरूरत नहीं, अरुण जरा देख लेना. The conversation went on that a stringer had to be appointed to Balia, and then we moved to other matters. Stringer would have cost only 750 rupees or 1000 rupees, no problem. So then time was over, tea was finished. I went to see Chandrasekhar outside the building to see him off. He said, वापस आना. I came back. When I entered the room, he said, इस के कहने पर किसी को अपॉइंट किया, मैं तुम्हें डिसमिस कर दूंगा. देखो, जब तुम्हें मुश्किल हो, then the growth रही थी. जब तुम्हें मुश्किल हो तुम कहना रामनाथ नहीं करने देता, जब मुझे मुश्किल होगी मैं तुम्हारे कमीज पर हाथ पोंछ दूंगा.
Editors and proprietors would get along a lot better today if this sort of understanding existed.
But you have to have persons who are not officious as owners. Not the owners. He was like a comrade. He was like a member.
But he also had the art and the talent, the guts and the capacity to stand up to some of the most powerful. You tell in your book a story about how Indira Gandhi wanted to take over the paper. he sent her a message to a third person, and actually it was a form of blackmail, and she backed off. Tell us that story.
Now, you see, what happened is, again, this is his story, so you have to always check out his stories. The story was that it was now clear to him that she's going to take over the paper. Now, but the rumor was that she would be arresting not just him, but his son and his daughter-in-law. So he sent her a message through a person. He told me Iyengar, एक lawyer था जो उसको जानता था, देवी को जानता था, तो मैंने उसे बेंगलोर से बुलाया. I have not been able to trace that. I noted there that I could not trace that who this Iyengar was, but on his telling. So he sent Iyengar कि भी एक मेरा मैसेज उनको देना है कि देखिए आपने मुझे जो भी करना है आप कर लो, मगर मेरे लड़के को और मेरी बहू को कुछ नहीं करना प्लीज़, क्योंकि अगर कुछ करोगे तो फिर बड़ी मुश्किल हो जाएगी. मेरे भी हाथ बंधे हुए हैं, क्योंकि वो जो कमला ने, मतलब कि उनकी मदर ने, मिसेस कमला नेहरू ने प्रभावती को, प्रभावती वाज द वाइफ ऑफ मिस्टर जयप्रकाश नारायण, कि उनको उन्होंने जो चिट्ठियाँ लिखी थी about her unhappiness in the marriage, about the way she was being treated, especially by Panditji's sisters, कि भी वो मैंने वो मुझे दी गई थी, जेपी ने दी थी, और वो मैंने एक लंदन के सॉलिसिटर के पास रखवा दी थी, और मैंने कहा था कि अगर मुझे या मेरी फैमिली को कुछ हो तो ये छाप देना, और मुश्किल है मैं उसको रोक सकता हूँ, मगर मैंने उस समय लिख दिया कि भाई अगर तुम्हें कोई मैसेज आए मेरे से कि भाई अब मत छापो, मत छपवाओ, तो मतलब है कि आई एम अंडर कोर्शन, तो एकदम छपवा दो. तो अब इसका मैं क्या करूं? But the even better story about
the look on Mrs. Gandhi's face when she got this message would have been unbeatable, and I take it she backed off.
She backed off. Well,
she wanted to protect her aunt's reputations, her mother's privacy, and so she said, "You win."
No, she wouldn't say you win. She'd say, "I'll get you later." But the even better story, and actually that's not told to me by him, but Veer Sanghvi reported it. It's a wonderful story. You see, in this very episode, now the government is going against Ramnathji, and the paper is besieged, and Kuldeep Nair has been arrested, and V.C. Shukla is the executor of all this. He is the Minister for Information Broadcasting. So Ramnathji goes to see him about the paper and what to be done. So V.C. Shukla, at that time, he was very big fellow. He, Om Mehta, Siddharth Shankar Ray, they were the terrors. So Ramnathji kept talking to him and shouting. After that, he saw that this fellow is not going to bend. He is being very officious, ministerial. So Ramnathji said in the end that actually, you know, the only thing that I am very disappointed with, which I regret about this meeting, is that I have had to revise my opinion about your mother. About your mother? Emergency में अखबार के बारे में बात हो रही है, मदर बेचारी को क्या है? He said, see, I knew your father, Ravi Shankar ji, I knew, he was my good friend, a thorough gentleman. You are not his son. So I had to revise my opinion about you.
Which is the nicest way of calling someone a bastard.
So now, whether he said this or not, nobody knows. But Ramnathji's story is this.
You know, he's only one of the characters that comes alive. They literally leap out of the pages of a book. The other one is the former President Giani Zail Singh. And I get the feeling that in many ways, Giani Zail Singh was a personality quite similar to Ramnath Goenka. He's shrewd, he was crude but charming, he was also cold and calculating.
But you know, there were many differences. For instance, and I don't think, you know, Ramnathji's great thing was that he was prepared to actually to lose everything. He used to say कि मैं एक लोटी पहन ना ये लंगोटी पहनकर आया था समस्तीपुर से या भागलपुर से और मैं जाने को तैयार हूँ. He was, and that was not just a boast, it was literally true. But I don't think Giani ji would do that. Giani ji would bide his time. He would bend, he would genuflect, anything. He would not. So there were many differences. But there was one thing that I liked about many of these people. Ramnath ji was one, Giani ji was the other, Devi Lal was one, I think Chandrasekhar. See, they really were what we call sons of the soil. They had risen from very humble backgrounds. Giani ji is known today as Giani ji, but actually he was almost illiterate, and Giani was only in the Granth Sahib, that he knew that. And but he became the President of India.
Absolutely, and you have a gorgeous story to tell about how when you called upon him at Rashtrapati Bhavan and he was President of India, this is how he greeted you. Shourie ji, gustaki maaf. वैसे तुसी बंदे किसी कम दे नहीं हो, ना कुड़ी चाहिदी है, ना पैसा, ना तुहानू शराब दा शौक है.
You see, because therefore I cannot use you. But that was Ramnathji's complaint also to my father. You see, he comes one day, 6:45 in the morning, my father and I are having tea, coffee, and then he's come to ask what happened in Bombay. My father tells him, see, now he is with you, आपके साथ है ये लड़का, जब से आपके पास गया ये बहुत, इसको एक बड़ी बुरी आदत पड़ गई, ये कॉफ़ी पीता है और इतने स्ट्रॉन्ग पीता है. सो रामनाथ जी से कि देखिए, ये इसको ना शराब चाहिए, ना लड़की चाहिए, पैसा इसको ज़्यादा नहीं चाहिए, इसको कॉफ़ी चाहिए. शौरी जी, इसी में आपके और हमारे में अंतर है. आप किसी का ऐब देखते हो और आप कहते हो कि भाई इस ऐब को कैसे मैं रोकूं, कैसे ख़त्म करूं. मैं ऐब देखता हूं, मैं कहता हूं अरे इसकी पूंछ पकड़ी गई, इसका मैं कैसे प्रयोग करूं. तो आपने इसकी कॉफ़ी बंद करवानी, आप करवाइए, मैं तो इसको कॉफ़ी देता रहूँगा. तो ज्ञानी जी वाज सेइंग द सेम थिंग. एंड देन ज्ञानी जी एडेड कि भाई तेनू सेठ पूरे पैसे दिंदा है कि नहीं. मैं कहा जी दिंदा पूरे पैसे. कहते नहीं, अगर कोई घाटा हो तो मैनू दसना. So when Tadlochan came,
you were offered a bribe, I suppose, from the President of India.
So when Tadlochan Singh came to see me, he was the closest person and a wonderful friend of mine, wonderful person. I checked with him again. So he said कि कितना हुई मीटिंग. मैं कहा कि मीटिंग तो चंगी थी, पर राष्ट्रपति भवन से बैठे हुए इतना जर्नलिस्ट ਨੂੰ कहना कि भी तेन कुछ कमी हुई तो मैनू दसना. कहता जी तुसी गल नहीं समझे, ज्ञानी जी की पॉलिसी नहीं समझे. उन्हों की पॉलिसी है कि बिल्ली ते हथ फेरो, देखो कि वो does she arch her back in delight or not, फिर अगे चलो नहीं तो छड़ दे.
So Giani ji was testing you.
Testing.
अगर लैंदा थे असी दे दवांगे, नहीं लैंदा थे की होया. But you know, Giani Zail Singh didn't get on with Rajiv Gandhi, who was Prime Minister. He felt he was slighted, he felt he was snubbed by Rajiv Gandhi.
Yes, he was.
You in your book have confirmed something that was speculated upon for over 30 years. Giani ji was ready and prepared to sack Rajiv, and Ramnath Goenka and Rajmata Sindhya had a leading role to play until you found out and stopped it. Tell us that story, because Rajiv came pretty close to being sacked until you stepped in.
Well, that will be claiming too much. But I'll tell you what the incident was. Yes, there were great tensions between them, and Giani ji was very upset, especially that he was not even being given essential information. For instance, about the riots in Delhi, the report had come at that time. He was not shown that. He was not shown the Thakkar Commission report about the assassination of Mrs. Gandhi. So he was, and he was the Sikh who was, the Sikhs were under a bad order at that time. So there was great tension, and there were these rumors that yes, he is pushing things too far. Rajiv is pushing things too far. So I get a call in the evening. Jaldi aao, ito turant aao. So I went to his Sundarnagar flat, to Ramnathji's flat, and Mulgaonkar was there reading a paper. So Ramnathji said कि भाई वो मुलगांवकर ने चिट्ठी लिखी है, वो ज्ञानी को भेज दी है हमने. क्या चिट्ठी है जी? कहना जी चिट्ठी है कि वो राजीव को डिसमिस करना है. कैसे डिसमिस करना है? नहीं वो तैयार हो गई, चिट्ठी भी चली गई, वो राजमाता लेकर गई है. So this argument started, and I had already been saying कि we should never dismiss a man. it's against the constitution and there will be popular revolt against this. You know, मुर्दे को आप खड़ा कर दोगे, वो जा रहा है. But so then Ramnath ji agreed. He said तो जल्दी से जाओ, रोको. मैं तो चली गई ये चीज. गाड़ी लाया, मैंने कहा जी नहीं मैं गाड़ी, तो मेरी गाड़ी में चले जाओ. So driver है, मैं कहा जी नहीं कहते तो मेरी गाड़ी में चले जाओ. So I went. And when I went into the Rashtrapati Bhavan, you know, the president receives you in one big room, and there's the military secretary sits in the other, stenos and all sit in the other room. And when I went in, Giani ji was standing there, and this white achkan and so on. I remember the scene. Tarlochan was there. I think Mr. Vardhan, his secretary, was there. He said, "Upar chalo." So we went up in the lift, and then I said, "जी कि मैं सुनिया कि ये होया है." He said, "हाँ वो राजमाता आके कह गई है, चिट्ठी पई है."
तो ज्ञानी क्या तैयार सीगा?
He said कि ये नहीं, he told me further. He said कि ये तरलोचन और ये वर्धन ड्राफ्ट नहीं कर रहे थे, इसीलिए मैं ड्राफ्ट मंगवाया है. And so then I told him कि ज्ञानी जी this is completely wrong. I gave the arguments और कि छितर पहन गए. वो 5 लाख बंदे बाहर ले आएगा कि राष्ट्रपति भवन ਨੂੰ ਘੇਰ ਲੈਣਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਕੀ ਕਰੋਗੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ? It went on and तो in the end then ज्ञानी जी said कि अच्छा फेटे मंगू तेरे तुम ये दे बरखलाफ है तो चलो. Anyhow the moment passed and then by the time I reached back, Mr. Vardhan had called Mulgaonkar and told him that the moment has passed, he's not doing it tonight. Now, I don't know whether he was actually going to dismiss. No, actually I had asked him another point कि और कोई तैयार भी है, कोई तैयार नहीं होएगा. Prime Minister बंदा वो MP देखो ना किन्ने, he has 3/4 of the Lok Sabha with him. He said नहीं 5 बंदे तैयार ने.
5?
हाँ. He said VC Shukla तैयार है, Arun Nehru तैयार है. I've given the names.
Venkatraman also.
Venkatraman, yes. And that's why he was offered the presidentship 3 months earlier. On the telling of Tarlochan and Giani ji and so on, I don't know the facts. Fully, I mean, I can only report what I was told. तो मैं कहा जी तुसी किसी ਨੂੰ ਚੁਣਿਆ ਫਿਰ? ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਉਹ ਬਸੰਤ ਦਾਦਾ ਪਾਟਿਲ.
From Maharashtra?
हाँ महाराष्ट्र, the former chief minister. He said वो बड़ा सियाना बंदा है, वो ठीक वो चला लेगा. Then I started my arguments against this. And so I cannot say whether he was going to dismiss him or he was doing an elaborate play to convince Rajiv Gandhi that I might even dismiss you. Because that is his, Tarlochan told me that was his policy. कि मारो नहीं, तरीको.
This was the billy. And he was rubbing its back to see.
No, not the billy. This is another thing. Maro nahi means don't hit the person, don't kill him, don't hit him. Tariko, frighten him. So Gyaniji's point, Tarlochan's point was that Gyaniji never intended to dismiss Rajiv Gandhi, but he was creating this elaborate.
That may be Tarlochan's interpretation, but the fact that he told you that he'd identified 5 people who were ready to take up the job, including Venkatraman, a former defense minister, and I believe probably at the time he would have been vice president, right, were ready to take up the job, and he was also...
No. I don't know if he was vice president, no. But I forget how.
And also he said that his preferred choice was the Sandada Patil. That suggests to me that he wasn't simply frightening Rajiv. He was actually thinking a stage ahead and possibly doing it. Had you not nipped it in the bud...
No, not that. I don't think we can jump to that conclusion in Gyaniji's case. He would, or these people could enact an entire play. To and you see, it did convince Rajiv Gandhi because the attitude of, as I have reported,
changed very quickly.
The ministers started coming, reports started coming, information started coming. Gyaniji had achieved his purpose.
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, by threatening, assuming it was only a threat and not something he intended to do, he got his way.
Yes.
He succeeded, the Prime Minister backed off.
That's shrewdness.
But nonetheless, there was a fear in Ramnath Goenka's mind that Giani may go whole hog, which is why he sent you you in his car and said, "Jao ji, jaldi jao and roko."
Partly because he might have felt that he had done something which was probably, there were second thoughts on that.
Now, it's not just fascinating anecdotes and stories like the ones that we've discussed that fill your book. Towards the end, you identify what you call 39 rules of thumb, and actually those are lessons that you've learned yourself as a journalist, as an editor, and you're advocating them to journalists today. I want to talk about some of those. Let's start with number 20. It says, we must not get too close to anyone about whom we may have to write one day. That will include persons in public life, persons in authority, a government official, a judge, and businessmen. So what you're saying is journalists should not get chummy either with powerful politicians or with rich industrialists. Distance is always necessary.
Yes, because see, because otherwise, if we become very close friends or become close to somebody, then a hijab aa jata hai, to use a current word. A sort of reticence comes in the way of our writing fully the full truth about somebody. So one should never be.
If you're friends, you don't want to expose a friend.
Expose a friend.
You end up protecting them.
So, and you know, generally the rationalization of journalists in this matter is that, see, I am cultivating a source, but actually the other fellow is cultivating an instrument. He is going to use you by planting stories, by defaming somebody else, a rival of his. So one should be very, this is a public, to be a journalist is a public trust. And so we must be
at arm's length from all people of influence and power, particularly those you write about.
Are likely to write about, and that would mean anybody.
Now let's come to rule number 24. It says, we must always bear in mind that the empire will strike back. So we must be squeaky clean. In other words, financial integrity and honesty are essential qualities in a journalist.
Absolutely. Karan, because obviously, look at the way these agencies are being used today. So naturally, if Ramnathji was not keeping the accounts properly, or if he was not doing the right thing about newsprint, which was in shortage in those days, then naturally the government would go after him, would use those levers to go after him. So, but financial integrity is just the first thing. I think it must be that we are honest in what we are reporting about the facts, about evidence, because otherwise we will lose the trust of the reader. How many journalists today would be believed by the readers or viewers today? Very few. Not because they know them, that look here, this fellow is financially dishonest, but they see him every morning, and they see him at every broadcast, and they see that this fellow is not honest in regard to the facts. So honesty, you are right, but not just financial honesty, it must be honesty in every aspect.
In other words, you must reveal all the facts and not hide them. Absolutely. Because it suits you to hide them, or you're protecting a friend.
Absolutely.
But it also means we need to be pretty careful about what sort of birthday gifts and Diwali gifts we accept.
Yes,
that's another way of undermining us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Diwali gifts can go on becoming bigger and bigger.
And many industrialists actually make a policy of sending out Diwali gifts to practically every journalist they know.
Yes, I had to. It is very interesting. In one case, they used to always send some very fancy, what do you call, cheese and chocolates and so on. So I would distribute them to our helpers. My son requires helpers, Anita requires maids, so we'd give it to them. So now I know my devaluation because I have gone down from those very expensive things to Nathu sweets, some jalebis or something.
In a way, so by the way,
give those also away.
In a way, that should give you a sense of pride. I'm not important because they know if they give me something, it won't get them the result they want. So why waste money on me? Now, at a time when we're all dumbing down, when journalists are holding back details because they think the reader can't take them, when we're holding back complex and complicated arguments because we think the reader will get lost, you argue exactly the opposite.
Yes.
You say one way to avoid this curse of mediocrity is not to pitch our writing to the average reader. We should aim much, much higher. Our treatment of a subject must pass muster with the expert in the field, with the authority on that subject, not the average reader, but they, the expert and the authority, must regard our treatment as worthy.
I always felt that. In analyzing a Supreme Court judgment, Justice P. N. Bhagwati's judgments at great length, it should not be the average reader who says, "Ki acha bhi hai to acha mara isko." No, Mr. Sirbhai, Mr. Palkhiwala, Mr. Nariman, Mr. Soli Sorabji, my friend Ashok Desai, they must say, "Ki bhai ye to naya point hai." You see, because life flies away, and if we go on doing mediocre things, there's nothing left to it. We have not learnt anything, we have not contributed anything, and other than losing our own life and time, it is that we would be, it will be a disservice to the country. Just see, if I am doing superficial writing in regard to national security, and tomorrow the threat materializes, I would have been putting our readers to sleep. I should have been doing the research so that even those who know the subject, they feel, yes, that's a new thing he has said on Chinese incursion.
But you also add that the talent is to express yourself in a way that you don't make it simplistic, but ordinary readers can follow.
Yes, that is Karan Thapar's rule, so it's very important. I realize that, but sometimes my articles used to be very long, and one of the best compliments I ever got was from a colleague, TCS Srinivas Raghavan. I must have written one of these long analyses of some judgment, and in the morning conference, TCS said, Arun has an unrivaled capacity to wade through shit. That you have to go through so many documents and write all this. True, but you should do it that way, so that there is no answer to it. If you just do a little bit, people think, he's forgotten this point. No. Come down as an avalanche.
Only then will you have an impact.
If necessary, yes.
Now finally, there's number 38. Rule of thumb number 38. This time, I'm not 100% sure I agree with you. You say, we mustn't worry about losing our job. There is life after dismissal. It is prudent to have 2-3 professions going. If we are blocked in one, we can leap on to the next one. That makes perfect sense for someone who's talented, who's lucky, who's privileged. But is it fair to recommend this to every other journalist?
Well, I can only express my own life's experience. But as far as privilege is concerned, all of us have some advantages. All of us have to bear many difficulties. So it is difficult to, we should put both our advantages to work, and when the difficulties come, we should put them to work also. And yes, we have a house because my parents built a house 60 years ago. In that sense, we are privileged. But the real privilege of our life has been that our families are very, very closely knit. So if I'm in trouble, I know that others will look after my wife and son. But would you regard that we have one child, and at 46 he can barely speak, he can't see very well, he can't use his right arm, he can't stand up or walk. He's a spastic adult. It's a privilege.
I didn't mean privilege in that sense.
No, but
what I meant was that you have the benefit of a family
Yes.
with income and a house in West End, which gives you the economic security to say, I don't mind if I lose my job.
Very good point.
A lot of other journalists don't have that sort of economic security. For them, they can't look upon it and say, there is life after dismissal. They can't say, I mustn't worry about losing my job. Their job is their life.
Well, that's true. But the examples they must keep in mind are different. We say we don't have a house. I'll give you a very big example so that nobody can dispute them. Goswami Tulsidas living in a thatched hut by a river. No house. Surdas without his eyes. Meera with a marriage which was not that happy, but immortal works. We must keep those ideals in front of us. Otherwise, we will then resign ourselves to mediocrity. And as far as difficulties are concerned, I really believe that one of the formulas of my life has been, we must defy fate. We will get advantages, we will get difficulties in our life, and we must put both to work.
The reason why you say to Indian journalists, we mustn't worry about losing our job, the reason why you say to them there is life after dismissal is because the nature of the system in India is such. A brave, outspoken journalist who challenges the system, who questions the Prime Minister, ends up out of a job.
Yes.
Abroad, that would never happen because the system is such, regardless of what you say. Woodward brought down Nixon, a sitting president.
Yes.
He survived and became famous. Nixon went into ignominy. But the system was different. The system there supported Woodward. The system here militates against an honest journalist. Rather than tell the journalist, accept your fate, lose your job, look for another one, why not say, we must change the system so that the system becomes like the American one which protects journalists. Journalists shouldn't have to make the sacrifice of losing their job. The system should change to give them the security they need.
But by standing up alone can we change the system. Otherwise, it's these people who are standing up and being victimized today who are the arguments for changing the system. Otherwise, if you get along, then the system will absorb you. It will not change you.
Hope and pray you're right. In an ideal world, the individual should become the argument for changing the system. I think what happens in India is individuals who stand up and lose their jobs get forgotten. They get sympathy, but they get forgotten. The world carries on, they get left behind. And in a sense, those individuals have made an individual sacrifice without any change to the system. But I hope you're right.
I hope so too. But in any case, we must do our little bit. If I will just conclude with this, Gandhiji is shot and dead. Life has gone on. Jesus is crucified, life has gone on. We are nobodies. But look at their great examples. Everybody goes away and things continue as they are. But our job is to be Charana Gandhi.
Yes, but not all of us can be Mahatma Gandhi or Jesus. It's nice to think
not
that
Mahatma
if I
Gandhi,
lose my job, I'll have the same stature. But I think that is illusory and delusional.
Not be Mahatma Gandhi. No. We try to be Char Ana Gandhi. That is the Guru Mantra that I was taught by Pyare Lalji, his secretary. Just, you will always say, no, he was Mahatma, how can I be like him? He said, therefore, in your life, आप चार आना गांधी बनने का प्रयास कीजिए.
Okay, Arun. Let's leave it there. I think this is an issue on which the audience would have to think deeply because it touches a moral core in all of us.
Yes.
Do I stand up for my principles to the point at which I lose my job? Or do I accept that there are certain necessities and exigencies that force a compromise because at the end of the day, I have to live? Those are moral dilemmas that all of us struggle with probably all the time. But I thank you for raising them. This is truly a fascinating book. And the nicest thing about it is the wonderful stories you have to tell. Take care.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you very much. Thank you for asking me to come. Thank you.